Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Emily Newman, and I am the founder of If I Made. And we're very excited today for you to be joining us for a class with Jasmine Ray on how to design a profitable cake business. Jasmine's going to be joining us in a few minutes. If this is the first time that you're joining us live for an If I Made live class, we're very excited to have you here. We always like to share a few things before the start of the class to give you the best viewing experience possible. So first thing, we are streaming live over the internet right now. So depending on your internet connection, whether it's fast or slow, will determine the quality of the video that you're about to see. So our suggestion is if you have a slow Wi-Fi connection and it's a little bit grainy or pixelated and it's delayed, we will be sending out a replay link later of the entire class to everyone that signed up for this class. And that replay link will contain a high quality video. So that's actually the best way to view it if you run into any connection problems during the webinar. Because we are streaming live, sometimes we do run into technical difficulties. And if for whatever reason, if you get kicked off the webinar or the screen goes blank, check your email and use the link that you'll see in an email that we send to you. If you have any problems logging on or having connection issue, you are also more than welcome to email info@ifimade.com, ifimade.com. We'll also put that email in the comment section, and we'll do our best to get you back onto the webinar. We have reserved time at the end for a Q&A with Jasmine Ray, which we're really excited about. Feel free to ask questions throughout the class, so in the comment section. We have two moderators that are going to be answering your questions, Rebecca and Mary, and then we're also going to be keeping track of as many questions as possible to ask Jasmine at the end of the class. And fourth, one of the things that we always try to strive for at If I Made is that this is a negative-free environment. So we ask that you guys be happy and positive in the comment section. Jasmine's going to be joining us in a couple of minutes, but before she does, I'd love to give you a little bit of background about Jasmine. Some of you in this class I know are very familiar with her work, but some of you may not be. Jasmine is a well sought-after cake designer in the wedding industry world. She has been a cake designer for over 10 years now. And it's been really interesting to see over the last few weeks, getting emails and seeing comments on social media, how so many of you are in the same place that Jasmine was 10 years ago. When Jasmine started out, she had no experience in cake design. Although she had a fine art background, cake was kind of a new medium for her. She had no advertising budget, no marketing budget, and she actually started off selling $100 birthday cakes. And we saw that a lot in the comments and emails that you have been sending out over the last few weeks, as you guys are in a similar place as Jasmine. And over the last 10 years, she has done things the hard way. She's had to make a lot of mistakes. There's been a big learning curve for her. And part of the class that we're teaching today is she's actually going to go into a lot of detail about that journey from beginning to end. Now Jasmine has a beautiful tasting studio in San Francisco. She has an industrial kitchen that she works out of. She works with celebrities from all over the world. And she's been featured in magazines like Martha Stewart Weddings, Huffington Post, The Knot Magazine, Harper's Bazaar. And we actually had a chance to meet with Jasmine and also film her course, not only in San Francisco, but in Atlanta. And as many of you know, this webinar is in celebration of the course that we're releasing today with Jasmine. And so we're actually working right now to get Jasmine on air. We ran into a couple of technical difficulties, but our team is working on that. And here she is. Jasmine, can you hear us? Oh, I can't hear you. Is your mic on? Hey, yay.
Can you hear me?
See you. Yes. Thank you so much. I just spent a few minutes kind of giving a little bit of background about you and your journey into cake design. And I was just going into detail about how we're doing this webinar in celebration of your course that's launching today.
Great.
Awesome.
Well, I was just learning how to use my cell phone as a personal hotspot. So.
Well, guys, just a quick rundown of today's class. We're going to be starting with a presentation that we've been working on with Jasmine, and she's going to go into kind of her journey, some of her pricing revelations that she's had. And then we're going to be actually showing a demo that we recorded in Jasmine's tasting room of one of her signature techniques. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A at the end. So we have a really, really great class for you guys today. Thanks again for your patience as we were working through some technical difficulties. Jasmine, I'm going to switch over to slides, and then we're going to go ahead and get started in hearing more about what got you into cake design in the first place.
All right. Well, the journey of what got me into cakes was actually a pretty modest one. I wasn't exactly the juggernaut entrepreneur who shoots straight for their goals. I'd say that my success came by kind of wandering a rough dirt road slowly and thoughtfully and just kind of searchingly. About 13 years ago, I had a very entrepreneurial-minded friend who had inspired and helped many of his friends start small businesses in San Francisco. And in 2006, I finally agreed to his prompting to start a bakery, even though I knew nothing about both baking nor owning a food business. But I was young enough at the time, had nothing to lose, and had just left a different career path. So I was looking around for kind of my next opportunity. And I was temporarily working an admin job at the time. Did I mention I was really young? A mutual friend of ours at the time had a new cafe, so I started baking chocolate chip cookie bars at home for the cafe. I would bake at night, deliver in the morning, go to my paper pushing job, then come home and start baking again for the next day. And because it looked like I was going to actually be making a serious go at this bakery business, I sought counseling from the Small Business Administration and shopped for used baking equipment with my friend's help. This process went on for about 8 months until we'd amassed enough equipment to build out a kitchen in an industrial artist building. And I would say that unlike many other people who are following this dream for their job, I was extremely, extremely lucky. He invested money and I invested a lot of sweat equity. Then I ended up quitting my day job and was all in. So I would say that my business has evolved many times in the last 12 years as I struggled to find its identity. Since it started on a whim and not as a dream, I lacked clarity and vision about what I wanted for it. And it took years for me to become fully invested. I had looked into selling it several times as I was burned out. I hired employees, adjusted my role several times as I tried on different directions to go in. I eventually quit all of my wholesale accounts and I focused just on making cakes. In fact, I remember the moment that I first spoke that desire into the world, sitting in my car as my mom listened. It was 2010. I just said, I just want to make cakes. So giving up the wholesale was a really big part about moving forward. It felt like that was the first time I really owned my business, took ownership of my business. Honestly, though, if I had been educated enough at the time to evaluate my business finances properly, I would have seen what a risky and actually ridiculous move that it was. However, in a way, I was emboldened because of my ignorance. Over time, I dramatically and steadily raised my minimum until I could be focused on just high-end artful cakes, making fewer and fewer cakes per week. My identity became more and more clear, and I would say that 2014 is the year it all coagulated, and I really fell in love with my work. It was finally a business that felt true and personal to me, equipped with years of skill development and an intimate understanding of my market and network. It still continues to develop and mature. I wouldn't say that I am by any means done or arrived or without challenges, but the business I have today is comparatively easy and rewarding, and I feel confidence in the principles that I've learned to make it what I want, even as it continues to evolve. So I'm nervous, but also honored to be spending today with you, talking about my journey and just kind of being in the yummy cake community, since there are really only social media platforms we get to really interact with each other, not so much kind of like at the workplace. So I hope that you can take some of these principles and apply them to your own businesses, kind of wherever you are in your career. I'm interested in the whole field of cakes changing to up-level all of us. So please take what you can today to make your own business and your own path work better for yourself. Moving on, after you had signed up for today's class, I asked you to email me about what you are struggling with in your business, and so many of you responded with really great inquiries and questions. Basically, the things that I had heard from you are you're struggling to attract your dream clients. Clients are too often pushing back on your pricing. You're not making enough money to sustain your business and passion. Balancing motherhood or your personal life and running a successful business at the same time feels pretty impossible. You are stuck in a creative rut and can't find resources to explore new techniques, which actually kind of dovetails into being in a creative rut because every day is a hustle just to stay on top of business demands. So please go ahead and share in the chat if any of this feels like you. One of my favorite parts about a live webinar is the community aspect. So, other people getting to see that you're having a similar experience is really important here. And honestly, hearing all the things that you've been struggling with, getting all of those responses from you guys was not a huge surprise. These are the things that I hear from everybody. I've been there too. And I've heard a lot of people tell me their experiences similar to this. And so whether you're dreaming of starting a business of your own, working through the night to get your business off the ground, or if you've been in business for years and need something to change, I'm really hopeful that this webinar will both inspire you to make the changes that are right for you and that we're able to offer practical suggestions to make it feel possible. At the end of the class, we'll share a little bit about the online course that you might have heard we're launching today. And thank you. I really appreciate all the excitement everyone's expressed so far about it. I'm very excited too. But first, the content of the webinar, we're going to focus on how to develop your cake career, kind of platforming off of my journey and hopefully moving from, a nighttime home baker to a full-fledged business or whatever form it's taking for you. The main content of this webinar is designed to benefit you if you dream of creating original designs that are authentic to you as an artist and not just another Pinterest cake. You want to attract clients that fit your aesthetic. You're ready or almost ready to make the jump from a part-time side gig to becoming a full-time cake designer. Or you want to, basically you're here to learn some of my signature texture techniques. You're struggling to find your own personal expression as a cake artist, having a signature and recognizable look, or you're struggling to reconcile your personal expression with the market you currently make for, and you don't feel you have access to a market that would be a better fit for you. I hear a lot that is really important for people to be moving toward. And you're excited to learn a better way to price your services so that your business feels more sustainable and maybe even profitable. And then one of my favorite intersections that we'll discuss today is you're trying to reconcile your artistic desires with being a business that makes money. That's a hard one. I mean, just classically, there's the struggling artist paradigm. So I hope that sharing my experience in this career, my journey, will help bring yours more into focus. Not necessarily because you'll be forging the same path I did, but because you'll be able to see the ways in which you're similar and different. And that reflection can bring more clarity about where your business can go. We'll be going over the following. And at the end of the class, we'll show a cake decorating demo. So these are the things I'm going to talk about today. The defining moment in my business that led to making more money while expanding my creative freedom. It was actually a causal relationship. How I continue to innovate and evolve as an artist and even structure inspiration into my work. Broke it down 3 pricing revelations that doubled my revenue in 1 year, and how I developed my niche in a market saturated by talented cake designers. And then at the end, the cake decorating video is a demo of painting a tarnished metal finish onto a cake, which is like the one that you're seeing actually in this slide right here. So let's talk about the first step in establishing a sustainable and profitable cake business. For me, this did not happen overnight. It was many years into my business, and it happened as I was finding my artistic voice. And as you know, it was definitely after I felt that kind of hit of ownership that I was talking about earlier in my business. I would say that in the 12 years I've been in business, there were 2 moments where I was sure I was done. I was going to sell, if just to relieve my chronic daily strain. Maybe this sounds familiar for your own story. I was burnt out of my business because it just felt like it was eclipsing everything that was important to me. My days were just about kind of helping the business survive and nothing else. Because I wasn't valuing myself or my art, which in turn caused a lot of strain on my business, it caused strain on my health, and it caused strain on my personal relationships. So during those points in my career, I was struggling with what I've come to identify as essentially 3 big things. Of course, I only know this in retrospect. I would say that the 3 biggest challenges in those moments were I couldn't charge enough for what I was doing because I was doing common things. I simply didn't feel inspired by the work that I was putting out, especially because what I was doing was more kind of bakery style cake making, which is a model that only works for larger operations with multiple decorators making cake orders. I couldn't charge at the level that I needed in order to sustain myself and my business. I was also saying yes to things I shouldn't have been saying yes to. Basically, I didn't have a clear enough business identity to inform what kind of orders I should be taking that would fit with who I am as a creative cake maker. One kind of slightly embarrassing example is many years ago, I made my last Minnie Mouse birthday cake, and decidedly so, because the experience was very unsavory and it left me feeling resentful with a client who was disappointed. And I realized that what I had done her a disservice by taking an order that wasn't an authentic expression for me. I wasn't interested in the subject, nor could I ever charge appropriately for the amount of time I wanted to be investing in my cake projects. It just wasn't the right fit for me and what I was interested in as an artist. I learned that I personally wanted more time with each cake. I really wanted to breathe a unique life into each cake and wanted each cake to be special and refined and detail-oriented. And what she wanted, it just was not the right fit for what I was interested in. The third big challenge that I identified is that I was spending too much time on low price point designs because I love the art form so much, but it meant I wasn't making money. The market was dictating my pricing. You want a car cake? Well, a bakery in the next neighborhood who has a retail shop, 15 employees, and a portfolio image chock full of car cakes to pick from will do it for $250. And they'll give you the exact same cake you saw in the photo. An employee who gets paid very little will execute it very quickly. And that just really, it wasn't me. It wasn't my shop. I loved taking more time with my clients and getting to know them, designing new flavors instead of offering a menu, researching inspiration for little details to add to the cake. I wanted every client to feel special and every cake to get my full attention. One other way to say it is I'm a slower worker. I kind of breathe with my work as I go. And because each cake was a unique order, not something that you picked from a book, I had to make every little detail by hand every single time. I couldn't afford to spend that kind of time on the cakes that I was making for what the market was willing to pay. And I never felt like I could streamline any part of my process the way much more smooth and professional operations can do for cakes like that. I was paying myself well below minimum wage. It wasn't the right business model for me. In short, these 3 challenges were different facets of the same thing. The identity of my business was still unclear, so none of my business choices were being made with clarity of purpose. It's kind of hard, actually, in this moment to remember just how overworked, inefficient, and overwhelmed I always felt. It was such a drain on my health and energy, community, self-care, satisfaction with my work, any drive that I might have had to continue investing in my business. And I don't think I was really quite aware at the time just how draining it was. I was very good at tolerating, continuing the daily grind. When my personal life changed, namely, I started a family, I got married, and then later had a child, the all-consuming nature of my business actually finally became intolerable. And if I couldn't take the risks necessary to help the business thrive, I was, for the first time, prepared to really give it up. And I needed more support. That was kind of a big realization for me. I had come from a school of thought that I was supposed to be able to do it all, practically by myself. And I know that many of you are probably resonating with that. I know a lot of people in this business who do the whole business by themselves, wear every hat. I believed I couldn't afford to hire more help. And I'm sure that that's true for a lot of you too. After a few years of paying for many fiscal rookie mistakes, I realized that I actually couldn't afford not to hire more help. And maybe I was not the best person for some of those hats, for particular jobs. And my business was actually suffering from my unrealistic expectations of myself. What I realized was I needed to be maximizing my strengths, which was the art side and the personal client relationships. And those were also my interests. And then delegating the areas where I was weaker, like bookkeeping and kitchen management, to people who were better suited for those jobs. It seems so basic to me now to redistribute resources like that, but at the time it felt so risky. It felt like a lot of responsibility. And it's true. When I started to hire more people, I did feel more responsible for them, more than just myself. Maybe I could have previously gotten away with foregoing a paycheck to me, but I couldn't do that with my employees. These higher stakes actually motivated me to charge more appropriately. Even if I couldn't be in touch with what I deserved to be even if I couldn't be in touch with what I deserved to be paid, I knew for certain that the people who worked for me deserved to be paid. And as it started to grow and become a little bit more robust, had more support, an interesting thing happened. Once my time and attention were freed up to be focused on the aspect of my business that I was most interested in, I was really able to evolve artistically and quickly. I'd spent years developing a skill that finally afforded me the freedom to create whatever I could envision, breaking the rules, innovating, refining my style, and for the first time, I really had the time to explore and really form something distinctive. It felt like a leap of faith. I would say that this time were kind of the teenager years of my business. You know, remember when you were a teenager and kind of exploring, taking on different identities. Who am I? Blah, blah. Anyway, my business ultimately started doing better, and I was putting more of myself into my art. I valued my work more, and if I could find the clients who valued my work too and paid for that, I could afford even more support, freeing me up to infuse more of myself into my art and reinforcing the cycle again. Learning to consistently make my work personal and even structuring that into my business model, I found was actually key. It was key to making it sustainable. I really like this slide. I like the little arrows in parallel moving into each other. This slide was developed by somebody at If I Made, and I just want to shout out because I really love the slide. I thought it was very clever. Continuing on about kind of finding your voice. Something that a lot of people ask me is, how did you discover your signature look? And for me, it wasn't a moment, but a process. I consume a lot of imagery from art, nature, fashion, other creatives, just walking down the street, anything. I reflected on some of the qualities my favorite imagery had in common. I reflected on my own work as it was forming. And when I reflect on the feedback that I've received about my art over the years, ever since childhood, certain words kind of came up for me that embodied all of those things that I was naturally drawn to. And then when I looked at the whole of my life, noticing where I make choices and express preferences day to day, essentially the same descriptors came up over and over again. This was a kind of a huge reflective exercise that was going on and on during this time for me in my business. And in short, these were the things that felt most alive to me, some of these words and descriptors. They were the internal feelings and external things that I was looking at and hearing and sensing. These are the things I wanted most to engage in the world. So I looked through some of the imagery that I had saved as inspiration, whether from the internet or from photos that I had taken, and looked for common themes in what I was being drawn to. This actually turns into an exercise that I use in my workshops to help you form your narrative and help define. For me, I found this was helping to define myself and my art. Some of my favorite words to describe the things that I was seeing all over my life, things that felt like me, were sensitivity, subtlety, complexity, depth, with maybe like one bold or surprising element. These words and terms kind of became part of my narrative, and as I spoke them to myself more often, reinforced what I was expressing in my art as I was experimenting. There was an evolution in my ideas for new cakes, a maturing, and as a result, the cake started to develop into the style that I'm now known for. So on the slideshow, I'll show a few examples. This first example is from a series of cakes where I had complete design freedom. I created this mood board and roughly sketched my vision in those 3 cakes right there, specifying the techniques, general color story, and general composition. I wasn't committed to any specific details. These are the final cakes that I end up making in the course that we're launching today. So you might have seen little sneak peeks of them over Instagram, but here's the next slide that actually shows the finished pieces. And then the next example is one that I had created for a wedding client. These are some of the cakes they liked from my portfolio. So I used them in the inspiration board for their proposal because I wanted to communicate more concretely how their design might look. I won't necessarily use a mood board in this situation because I don't want it to conflict with the mood board that either they've put together or their wedding planner has put together for their wedding. So I'll use actual examples of cakes to give them a sense of the final look. In my consultation notes, actually for this particular cake, I had instructed my future self to listen to Frank Sinatra while making their cake. And this next slide is the sketch and the final cake. And yes, I do always leave the sketches really rough at this stage, and I never color them in because I like to have freedom to move, kind of play a little bit with the full expression. I want to be able to respond to the cake. And these examples, when I look at them, they are, and then I think about the narrative words and terms that I was using for myself. Like, these are the things that I keep checking back in with as I make work, as I design something and then execute it, coming back in, is this fitting with who I am? And that's one way of kind of focusing my identity as an artist. In this case, by finding where the client and I have creative resonance and similarity, I feel I'm more likely to succeed in pleasing them, because when I use the words from my own narrative about my work with my clients, they're more likely to get a sense of the final cake and are more comfortable with allowing me to create the creative freedom that I really like to have as I'm working. I'm better set up to make my work truly personal, and we are better set up for them to be really happy and satisfied and hopefully gleeful and delighted by the final cake. If my narrative doesn't work for them as I'm talking about it during consultation time, and they won't book, which is better for both of us, because then we both know that we're not the right fit. So one really specific exercise that you can do to form your narrative, and this is the thing that I talk about in the in-person workshops as well, is it's really basic. Start by writing down just 5 sources that inspire you. And it can be other creatives' work from any field, specific imagery. It can be the way your grandmother makes a bed, nature, etc. Ask yourself, what do these things have in common? And go deeper than simply color with this question, because that's a pretty easy thing to default on. And then write down some of the words that describe those commonalities, that describe what draws you to those inspirations. Those words should feel like home. When you apply these words to your own art, your favorite pieces that you've ever created, they should resonate with a sense of you-ness. And then check back in with yourself as you make your next cake. Remember those words you came up with when you're working on your business, your art, and your brand. That's part of refining and focusing your voice. So for me, as I was refining the sense of myself, I was inspired, and then I became really committed to only ever making cakes that felt like me. I didn't want to make other types of cakes anymore that weren't in alignment with who I was being clearer and clearer that I was becoming as an artist. However, it did take time to start to turn the work that I had on the books into the work that I wanted on the books. And I implore you to be patient and gentle with yourself too when you go through this process. So backing up a bit, as I was starting to understand my own artistic preferences and expression, I needed to put my hands on these concepts. I needed to actually be creating a body of work, a serious portfolio that depicted to clients what was possible when you came to me for a cake. And at the time, no one was going to be paying me for something that only existed in my head. I hadn't stood out yet for what I was trying to do. I didn't even necessarily know where my narrative was going to take me. Basically, the process was one of experimentation, checking in with myself, experimenting again, kind of a scientific approach. I love science. So there are a few ways that I was actually practical in applying my intention. And I'll discuss 3 suggestions to start experimenting with your own style if you haven't been doing this already, or even if you have, how to kind of further it and keep going. And might I also enforce just how important it is. 1, break the mold. 2, create from your mistakes. And 3, make time to play, kind of in a nutshell. But if it feels right to you, creating in a way that feels kind of like safe enough, but also exhilarating, that's kind of the sweet spot. So breaking the mold and challenging your ideas of what's right or customary is going to be different for everybody. What qualifies to you now as a tool or ingredient might be something to challenge or look at again. When I saw something really popular, like all over the internet, I would run in the opposite direction, unless I felt I could do it in a really fresh way, because a lot of other people have really amazing ideas, and we want to be able to use inspiration from others, but really bring ourselves as authentically as possible to being inspired by those ideas. So 2 examples about breaking the mold. 1, there was a point where I was really over using fondant. And a lot of people basically just kind of go back to buttercream, or maybe they'll wrap a cake with wafer paper. But I really wanted to use something different. I ended up returning to fondant because I found something new with it. But during this period of time where I was like trying to let it go, I went to an Asian import store here in San Francisco, and I found rice paper, which is edible, and started making flowers with it. And I'd never seen anyone use this material on a cake before. And by the way, in the online course we're launching, I do show you how I make my rice paper flowers for the first time, actually. The second example of breaking the mold for my particular way is the really famous geode cake forged by intricate icings. This cake was so beautiful and everybody went crazy for it. It was such an arresting cake design. And lots of people were recreating essentially the same cake, but maybe in different colors or compositions. So when I was inevitably approached by a couple who wanted a geode cake, I really had to reflect on what's the me version of it. I had to rethink the whole concept behind the design, bring my unique techniques, skills, and ideas to it. So you can see here my personal evolution of this popular cake design. And I just want to note that breaking the mold isn't for everyone. The world needs classical artists too, those most interested in honoring tradition. And if you can sing full out and know yourself deeper as that is just as valuable. So maybe if you're interested in experimenting, my second suggestion might be helpful. To create and embrace your mistakes. Maybe even try making mistakes on purpose. Can you see something beautiful in them, even if it's really unfamiliar to you? One example for me that really forged kind of a signature look for me is about what my bakery was presenting me, the opportunity my bakery was presenting me. My bakery naturally operates at a really low humidity, around 35%, which meant that the fondant I'd be working with didn't stay fresh, smooth, flexible, or easy to work with. It was drying very quickly, and traditional cake covering was often frustrating. Sometimes the fondant would crack, so I'd have to start over and work even faster. Eventually, the perfect and smooth finish as I was going wasn't really a satisfying payoff compared to the effort that it took to get it to be so perfectly smooth. So innovation was actually right under my fingers all along. Instead of adhering to the norm of smooth fondant finishes, I realized there is a whole new world of possibility for design in the cracks and the brokenness of what was happening as the fondant dried. As I embraced that, it actually inspired in me an interest in attending to what is actually happening as I work versus resisting for the sake of convention or a commitment to a design. Then my third suggestion for experimentation, I might recommend setting aside playtime each week. This one is so easy to push to the wayside due to orders you need to fulfill, being busy with your family, bookkeeping, endless, really. But I promise you, if you don't dedicate time for your business to grow creatively, you will feel more and more stifled. And please feel free to shout out in the chat if that feels like you. Even if you can't set aside this time regularly, maintaining an attitude of play with the work that you're doing can still really benefit you. So those were a few specific suggestions on experimenting and creating for yourself. But perhaps they're feeling unrealistic in your current business. Because of the nature of this field, you might be booked out for weeks and months and can't even imagine having the space to play, explore, innovate. I know you all have paying clients who aren't necessarily ordering your dream cakes today, and I did too, and I found that it's essential to give yourself time to make this transition. Sometimes you even have to force it into yourself or structure into your business. And I get it, because you still have bills to pay and orders to fulfill, but it helps to hold it in your mind that this is the place that you want to go. And if you're making intentional steps toward creating artistically fulfilling work, you will get there. And in the meantime, reach out to community. I love just kind of commiserating with my local colleagues. So moving on, that isn't even just the end. You know, finding and developing your personal style isn't kind of the ultimate. It can seem like, oh, that'd be so wonderful, but we are artists in business. And this is where I feel many artists struggle. Kind of maybe once you start to get your personal style and sense of self, you are still a business and you get paid to make something meaningful for other people. So how would you sell your vision, your cakes, to potential clients? As a cake artist, you make a product that is intrinsically in demand, a cake to mark a celebration, unlike, a painting that isn't necessary to somebody. But you'll really set yourself apart in the market once you understand your unique value. This is a really important conversation to me. It's something I've thought about a lot. When you start creating from a very personal place, it will strengthen your sense of value and what you're worth as an artist. I really believe that. When you simply create to please the client and not yourself, it's much harder to appreciate your own value, which probably results in charging less than you're worth. When you do you, you're only in competition with yourself. After starting a family and realizing that my business was only worth keeping if it could add to my life and not drain my resources from those that I loved, I needed a complete perspective shift. The perspective that my pricing is based on the market to knowing that my pricing had to be based on the needs of my business and life. It seems totally crazy to me, to make a shift like that. But it was so necessary. And I would say this is part of the lesson that my new techniques were teaching me. It's just another example of resisting versus flowing. Believing in what I was doing creatively really set up the framework for me to believe in my pricing. Once I was creating for myself, as opposed to always at the whim of a client, I felt more empowered to charge what was necessary because I was selling me. And I believed in me. Believing in my value led my clients to believe it too. And I felt this was the key to filtering in clients who are the right fit for my business, for my art and aesthetic. And when the fit is right, we're both more likely to have a happier transaction. I found this was actually really, really good for my business. It was very healthy for my business. So now I'll share with you a little bit of a chip that I have on my shoulder. But it's also really important to me. I have found society at large values art in general more than the wedding industry, creatives. And yet we've all seen that there are many wedding industry creatives who would be a huge contribution to the fine art world. What we create for a single day that is likely to be the most vivid, joyous, meaningful gathering of community in a couple's life, I feel should be just valued just as much as an art piece hanging on the wall that becomes part of one's day-to-day scenery. Furthermore, because of photographs and memories, a wedding day and all its efforts live beyond that single day, and that's really worth something. I know a lot of people talk about, oh, it's a lot of effort and work just for one day or 6 hours. But I think it's actually something to be really inspired by. That moment is infused with more aliveness than, maybe something that's kind of drawn out over years. That experience really is something special. So I feel that in the wedding industry, that working together to establish value, particularly for cakes, celebration cake world, really not just the wedding industry, but all kind, it's vital to all of our success. This is a very powerful and motivating point for me. So I'm actually going to say it again. Working together in the wedding industry to establish value in the cake world is vital to all of our success. I believe there hasn't been enough precedence yet among cake makers to see it as a very profitable venture or one really worthy of prices that would make it truly sustainable business, especially when compared to some other types of vendors in the wedding industry. I've observed that it's been done by florists and photographers and a few cake makers, but it's still pretty new and edgy territory for those of us making cakes in general to be charging at similar levels as other high-end designers and artists. The cake field at large is typically seen as more juvenile than our wedding industry counterparts. So I'm kind of on a mission to be part of the movement towards making this a truly sustainable business for the cake makers at really all levels of experience. I recognize that many people come to this field because they were passionate about it, were often not formally trained, and because of those conditions, temper their pricing with a large dose of guilt or a lack of confidence. So I really feel the market has to change, and it'll start with the most in-demand makers kind of setting the precedent, but it'll really fill out when everyone starts charging with a sense of purpose to actually thrive in the business. When you're first starting out, whether you entered from the culinary world or the art world or your own home kitchen, it may be appropriate to charge on the lower end of the market because you're an incubator. You're discounting in exchange for your education. That makes sense. However, as you're growing, investing in training, workshops, you spend time experimenting, gaining more experience and expertise, you would do yourself and your colleagues a favor to adjust your prices accordingly and graduate yourself to a sustainable business from which you can make a living. This was one of the hard things for me. It wasn't just about me. It was about doing this work for everybody. Aim for financial health. I suffered and burned out because I never asked myself, how long can I afford to incubate? Valuing your time and yourself is internal work, yes, but there are practices that can help structure and reinforce this development in your business. And I found that out the hard way many years in. So I wondered, how could one actually quantify this to see an increase in profits over time? And there are many ways to approach your pricing. Personally, I use a 3-prong approach to get my pricing kind of in the ballpark. I go over that more extensively in the course, but for the purposes of today's time, I'll discuss kind of one quick and dirty approach that I learned from the Small Business Administration. Start by assigning yourself an hourly wage. Remembering that you pay taxes, shop for ingredients, make deliveries, answer email, and probably manage an Instagram account. A common rule of thumb is to then multiply what you want to pay yourself by 4. So using this model, and this is just one of many models or several models that you should probably employ simultaneously, but using this model, that number, that times 4 of your hourly wage, that's the gross revenue each of your work hours should be generating. And that applies for each of your employees, if you have them too. Does that seem crazy? It did to me. If it does seem crazy, think about when you meet with other professionals. For example, 10 years ago, I met with an architect because I had a fancy about opening a cake shop at one point, which I never did. When I met with that architect, he charged me his hourly rate. It was our first meeting, and his rate was $185. Remember, 10 years ago. What I got from that meeting was a conversation and the opportunity to tell him what I wanted to do. I didn't even get to walk away with something in my hand, let alone belly, and before he did an ounce of work for me, including even a proposal, I was charged a very hefty retainer. Reflecting recently on that meeting a few years ago when I started shifting my whole ideas about pricing, that reflection, it was a light bulb moment. Why was it okay for him to charge that in his industry, but it's not okay for me to do that? In the cake world version, we have tasting consultations for our first meetings. I sat down and I calculated my costs to create a tasting, basically ingredients and then the time, labor involved. And I was really disappointed. It didn't even account for overhead, plus the time I was taking out of my day to sit with clients, not to mention the time it takes to physically and mentally transition between the day's tasks. And it was so much less than I was being paid for the tasting. It was crazy to me. I'm sorry. What I was being paid was so much less than what it was costing me. And it was crazy to me to think that some people weren't charging at all for their tastings. I could imagine that a lot of my colleagues were entertaining many more tastings than they were bookings because it's free. So why not? I know it's customary for tastings to be a loss leader, like a trial gym membership. So the reason to charge is specifically about ensuring that I'm sitting with serious inquiries only. I charge as much as I feel I can in my market, and I feel it is the best way that I can protect my time in my business. So one practical thing you can do today with your tastings, because I know that the tasting situation is kind of a big problem for everyone, and hopefully we will all work together to start to change this for ourselves so that we can be a little bit more like architects and other designers. But something that you could try today is to really figure out the actual cost of a tasting for you, your ingredients and labor, including your time, your actual time, and just generally consider that you might spend time scheduling the tasting beforehand. Could be many emails back and forth. You might draft a proposal afterwards. Remember that that time is time that you will never be able to bill for. So the things that you do charge for in your business have to cover the unreimbursed hours in the long run. For me, that felt like a very mature business understanding, and I did not have that for many, many years when I started. If we were to look at the journey I've outlined as a neat little formula, which it wasn't in its reality, we have now established an artistic voice, then established value to our clients. And now it's time to keep that momentum sustained over time. And I wonder, how would one do this? I realize value with a capital V isn't only about money, not even close. But in order to continue to be sustainable, money does become an important measure. And it's the thing that everybody struggles with. It's just one small measure of success, but it's such a big conversation all the time. And I'll be the first to admit that it took me a really long time to get over my reluctance to respect the function of money. It's almost a taboo subject to talk about. So it's even a little bit edgy for me to talk so clearly about it today, and also in the course filming when I went even more in depth. When I started my business, I was doing something fun. It actually felt a little bit like a clubhouse. I wasn't invested in creating something sustainable to support a family. I didn't even think that far into the future. I was unmarried. I didn't have children. And I didn't have enough respect for really money and what it was supposed to do. I wasn't responsible to anybody other than myself. If my business wasn't thriving, I was the only person impacted by that. When I got married and had a child, it really changed everything for me. It wasn't just about me anymore. Every hour that I was away from my son not only cost us childcare dollars, that's like the small thing, it cost me the time that I could be with my baby. Those hours had to be compensated for both financially and for my own personal fulfillment. I needed my business to make a lot more money and be a lot more satisfying. And those two things really ended up being very linked for me. They came together. My business had to be profitable and personal, feed my family and my soul. Have I emphasized it enough? I was pretty much prepared to give it up if I couldn't take the risk that got me to fulfilling that. And it was hard to be in that position where I felt like I might have to choose between the life I wanted and a business that I had spent so many years creating. But I found after taking big risks that it was possible to find balance. My family ended up being the catalyst to make my business work for really the first time. A few rules that I actually have found really helpful to stick to in order to maintain that balance, which is not like a static thing. Balance, it's just like kind of a constant moving back and forth. So, forgive yourself the moments that you go off balance, even as you're really working toward growing a business that feels like good and yummy to you. We kind of broke it down into 3 revelations about pricing. So I'll share those with you right now. And the 3 pricing revelations for me were: 1, stop using other vendors' pricing as a benchmark. I used to price along the lines of what my colleagues were pricing. That seemed to make a lot of sense to me when I entered this business. It was my anchor point, and it was largely based on kind of cursory bits of information I'd gather here and there. I didn't actually know what everybody else was charging. And it took me years to realize that if I was using other people's businesses as a rubric, my business was really never going to be sustainable. And this kind of goes back into that chip I was telling you about that I had on my shoulder. Society hasn't really set this up to be a very sustainable or profitable business. And many of my colleagues, locally and all over the world, had spouses, partners, or day jobs supporting them financially. So it wasn't as important for their cake business to be thriving. It didn't necessarily mean they were satisfied, but it was something they could continue to kind of do on the side. And everyone assumes, who isn't necessarily in this field, oh, you must love your work, be following your dream, etc. Those kinds of comments I found really only further reinforced that as a cake maker, I shouldn't charge a lot, because believing that I should be living out my dream was my compensation. Believing that we should be paying for the privilege of living our dream. But it wasn't a dream at many points. Working 29, 30, 40 hours on my feet, sleeping on the concrete floor next to my butcher block tables, pounding cake scraps instead of healthy food, cashing in favors from everyone I knew just to get the week's cakes done in time. Like, that was never part of anybody's dream. I don't know. I don't care who you are. That's not a dream. And that's only if you're bold enough to make it your sole career. For many people, it's a side gig because that's the level that fits inside their life. And it never really takes off as a full-time business. And maybe that is the right fit for your life, which is great. But if you do want it to be a full-time business, figuring out what is the real dream of how your business will work for you, that's so important. For me, if I wanted my business to stand on my own, I needed my own pricing structure based on my real dream, which included more balance in my life, included my personal health. I couldn't base my pricing on the compromise that so many of us are used to making in this industry. This is why I'm really passionate about advocating for a shift in the industry for all cake makers to be seen as artists. One of my missions is to be part of that movement towards making this a sustainable business for everybody. Anytime I feel the old habit tugging at me to reduce my pricing, I remind myself that I'm doing this for more than just me. And once I realized what I needed to sustain my business, I learned how I needed to be pricing my work in order to make enough. Later, I'll share one quick version of how I consider my pricing, and in the course, I go more in depth. My second revelation was I could put certain boundaries around my business, such as hours I worked per week. It was actually better for my business in the long run, and it helped me establish a more robust system of support. 70-hour weeks did not have to be my norm. Before I changed my pricing method, I was letting what I was charging for my work dictate my life, aka I was having to work far too much to make ends meet. What changed is that now I'm more realistic with how much work I need to do in order to make the necessary revenue. My life was informing my pricing now, not my market. And it's not perfect yet. I wish I could do just one cake every 2 weeks, but that's not how my business exists at the moment. My business is still in transition, and I would need time to, make that transition or maybe take another big risk. At the moment, I find that 1 to 3 cakes per week is really workable for me, but 5 cakes is too much. It's just based on what I'm interested in and how much time I really want to spend with each cake, with each client. So I'd recommend giving yourself time for your transition too, to move your business from wherever it is now to where you really want it to be. My third revelation was that I found that the art of finance is different than the art of cake design. And that was a lot harder for me to learn, actually. I learned that I had to treat money differently than my art. I had to structure it into my business with a plan and not just let it evolve naturally, as I often do with my design process. I used to increase my pricing or not increase it based on the level of resentment I felt about how hard I was working or whether I was turning clients down enough. And I hear from a lot of people that that's typically, those are kind of like the tipping points for people to change their pricing. And I found that it's not an effective system. It wasn't always protecting my business interests. I wasn't actually responding to my needs. I was responding to kind of what I didn't want to be experiencing, not what I wanted to be experiencing. So at that point, I found that I really needed to have external systems in place to run my business. It's like a recipe. It wasn't enough for me to just kind of check in whenever I felt like it. I needed to structure in checking in with my business on a regular basis. And after I realized that my business needed to be bringing in more revenue, I approached some of my venue accounts and I told them that I needed to charge 50% more than the previous year, which felt very edgy to me. This was one of the biggest risks that I took. Surprisingly, they all agreed, and it was revelatory that that happened. I just realized how small my thinking had been before. I ended up kind of doubling my future revenue in one meeting. And so now I really make it a practice to reassess my pricing every year, no matter what. And I even think about it in advance. Like if there's a date that I'm going to be assessing my pricing, I start thinking about it the months prior, like what sorts of areas need that assessment. Building that in has actually been very freeing for me because now I know I will check in to constantly be maintaining the health of my business. One thing you can try today if you are just starting out, have you ever put down your pricing and costs on paper to figure out your fees? If you've been in business for a while, you could sit down and think about the last time you raised your prices. Google the cost of living in your area. Google the increase from year to year of the cost of living. If it's going up, why wouldn't your prices go up? I'm sure there are tons of questions about this. It's such a huge conversation for most of us, and it's hard to talk about. In the course, I do go over more specific models that I use to define my pricing, but please feel free to ask questions in the chat now. There'll be a chance later where I'll be trying to get to as many questions as I can. I hope you've benefited from a lot of today's content. It's been a lot for me to talk about kind of continuously. And even though I can't stand up and look at the size of today's participants, I have a lot of gratitude that you showed up and seeing all the excitement that people were sharing in advance. In preparing for this webinar and reflecting on my journey, remembering these the challenges, the hardest points, the overwhelm, the resentment, moments of disempowerment, I'm actually pretty amazed that I stuck with it in those really challenging times. I must have really been loving something about it. I'm sure you all understand. At those challenging times, I was definitely floundering and really wishing for guidance. And I'm not saying that it's all done and gone forever, no more ever. I've mastered it and I'm totally on top of everything all the time. I actually hope that I still have little potent reminders that I'm growing and reaching into new territory. If I hit some of those little challenges again, I hope they knock me just a little bit off balance and not so dramatically off balance like they used to. I never want to stop exploring, and I welcome those little growing pains. But today I really do have more peace and satisfaction than I've ever had in my business. And that feels really amazing. That's one of the things that feels really good in kind of preparing for this and reflecting on my journey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the course that we're launching today. It's the first full-size.
Jasmine, real quickly, there seems to be a little confusion that it's the end of the webinar and that we're not doing the demo. So I just want to let people know the demo is coming. It'll be here and we're going to start in about 5 minutes. So everyone hold on. And then we are going to be doing Q&A at the end with Jasmine as well. Jasmine just wanted to do a little announcement since some people were confused in the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. There should be a little more transition. So we'll talk about the course and where you would be able to continue the conversation and just kind of take in a little bit more. There will be a demo and I'll be answering questions during the demo as well. And just right now, we're going to talk a little bit about what the course is. And let's see.
What happened? You okay, Jasmine? Oh. Hey guys, sorry about that. Jasmine actually, there was a little bit of a technical difficulty. Jasmine's going to be back on to teach the demo in just a second. So I'm going to continue the conversation about what's in the course. We're super excited about these 2 new courses that we've produced with Jasmine. So it's called A New Vision for Cake Design. And both of these courses, this course includes the art of cake design and the business behind cake design. So Jasmine, one of the things that we've heard people say is that the reason you know Jasmine is because of the art of cake design, but the reason she's still in business is because of how successful she's been in building a profitable cake design business. So something that's included in the business of behind cake design, you're going to learn Jasmine's unique blueprint. Hey. So we're actually already on the business behind cake design slide.
Okay.
Go ahead and pick it up from there.
Okay. What's been said yet?
I was just starting on talking about the slide. So your unique blueprint for developing original designs, your sales process, if you want to pick it up there.
Okay. I would like to talk about that, but I actually wanted to talk a little bit more about just kind of the process of doing this, making this course, kind of envisioning it. When we were naming this course, sorry for the interruption, by the way, you guys. When we were naming this course, we actually had a really big discussion. It's called A New Vision for Cake Design. And the reason that we landed on that was because I felt like it addressed my views, not only of how I work in my own studio, trying to re-envision cakes, but also how I'm helping to change the industry. Work through the lens of being an artist. So for the business behind cake design, it's divided into A New Vision for Cake Design is divided into 2 kind of sub-courses, the business behind cake design and the art of cake design. I know that anyone can get into this business. It seems easy enough. You don't need a degree, tons of specialized equipment, or much startup capital. You can do every job by yourself, and you already have a knack and a passion for the bulk of the work. But what that often means is that when we're entering this field, we're likely at a disadvantage because many people who turn cake making into an entrepreneurial venture don't necessarily know how to run a business. And it may not be especially clear about what makes their business really special or how it's going to survive and last. Because as cake makers, our capital investment wasn't much, kind of, the way a law education, $150,000 law education might be. We aren't hungry in the same way new attorneys usually are, nor do we feel entitled to higher compensation, and nor is the industry or society at large generally prepared to compensate us accordingly. So the business part behind cake design, I feel, is really special. I feel like it's something that the If I Made team is very intentional about including in all of their courses. And I haven't really seen that many outlets like this to actually to have this conversation, to discuss this more thoroughly, more intimately with somebody's actual business. So I'm very honored that I get to be somebody kind of putting that on display. It's something that I really wish I'd had an insight into myself many years ago before I had to kind of learn it the hard way. So the business portion of this course is practical and applicable to all sorts of business models. And it also is, kind of my philosophical approach and the way that I think about my business. Those are the valuable things, I think, because those principles are the things that ultimately allow me to keep being responsive to my market. So in this course, I talk about my unique blueprint for developing original designs. So now we're on the slide here. My developing philosophy on pricing, perceived value, and being true to yourself. A lot of that was actually informed by my psychology education. The business decisions that I made that convert most of my tastings, like 90%, into actual cake orders without discounting myself. And the pricing model, which eventually took me from $100 minimum to a $2,000 minimum. And I share my entire client experience from inquiry to booking, including the proposals and actual forms that I use in my business. That's part of the course. And really the most important thing for me about the business course is how being inspired and unique in the market dovetails into a sustainable revenue. Those two really are causally related. And that's what's special to me about it. That's what makes doing my art feel like it can work in a business type of context. The business content of the course can be helpful for hopefully wherever you are in the age of your business. We address this content so intimately because I'm really actually committed to the whole industry changing and maturing. So whether your identity as a business person in this field is that you are a sprinkle-topped pink cupcake type of designer or a dark and moody black beret wearing type of cake sculptor, you've probably encountered some form of being devalued professionally, perhaps by a client who tried to play hardball with you or even at a cocktail party conversation. My motive for sharing what I've learned and even putting it on sale for this short period of time so that it's more accessible to colleagues is because this is the information that I'd want us all to have as cake makers to up-level the whole industry. This is the information that I wish I'd had when I started. I really feel like this is more important to share and be open and exposing for the benefit of everybody. It will come back and benefit me in my business too. So we go pretty in depth in the course. They've broken it down into 5 video lessons covering the creative process, which is my story and struggles, the tipping points that helped me find my aesthetic voice, branding and marketing, which is turning my artistic voice into a brand that kind of placed my identity in the market and continued to reinforce itself. When I look at my own branding, it helps me remember and reinforce what I'm creating, and it builds on top of itself. So I feel that organizing the branding is actually very important. The client experience, which is about how I interact with my clients from start to finish, how I manage my time, my business to be more workable and efficient. I actually work half as many hours now since I started a family as I used to, and make so much more money than I used to, like almost double. My pricing, where I discuss my philosophy on pricing, sustainability, my actual financial models, and how I believe self-worth impacts the way we handle money. And then equipment and logistics, which includes a little tour of my kitchen and studio spaces, along with the equipment that I use, how I deliver my cakes. All of the business videos share about my process, how my business developed as I was learning better, how to make a business that worked and worked for me. And I'm not going to suggest that you do exactly what I did. Hopefully the course's education would help streamline your experience to be a little faster and easier than mine. And you may not end up in the same place that I'm in, because ultimately your business will be unique to you, your life's needs, your strengths, skills, interests, resources, your location and your desired market. And though we include very practical information that you can implement immediately, the larger purpose of sharing my business, like I said, is about the principles that can be applied to a huge variety of models, with the hopes really that more than anything, you get an inspiring shift of perspective about really feeling like just the faith in knowing that you can make this business that you've created work for you in a way that is just satisfying on so many more levels than perhaps it is now. The other half of the course is about the art of cake design. It's a continuation of my approach to cake making, but it's about actually making a cake. I make 3 cakes for the videos, depicting 3 of kind of my favorite and most notable techniques, all centered around time-worn textures and the beauty of aging. In the videos, I will decorate these cakes from start to finish, and because I was doing it in Atlanta, which was a very unfamiliar environment for me, you'll watch me kind of stumble, reorient, and then fall in love with and draw on my body of knowledge as I surrender to the creative process. It was actually a very enlivening experience to film these videos. And now these cakes live in my tasting room as kind of beautiful reminders of that time when. So in the art of cake design, the videos are broken out into 5 main topics: materials and tools. This is basically an intro to the tools that I use, both basic and ones you'd be familiar with, as well as the unexpected tools that I use, and the process of designing the actual course's cakes and how in general I think about cake design. The first cake is a complete walkthrough how I make the base texture, which I call rough stone. And I use that for many of my designs at the base. And then sometimes I'll just treat it in a variety of ways to get different effects. But I also have a very unusual way of applying fondant onto a cake, which people tend to be pretty surprised about when they see me do it. And then my version of creating and applying bas relief, which is a really beautiful technique that a lot of people use. The next video is of the kintsugi design cake. I'd made these 3 cakes to go together. And this particular cake is about honoring the beautiful process of reforming brokenness. So it starts with the rough stone base, and then I apply some of my rice paper flowers to it, along with that line of gold that runs between the 2 tones used on the design. And then the third cake shown in this portion of the course is the metallic and aged painting cake. And this cake is about impressions and a subtle finish, a subtle metallic finish, kind of playing with different layers to get more depth to the metallic finish instead of just like an opaque covering. And there are a lot of different impressions used in it, as well as the bas relief. And letting it stand on its own, I felt, was really important, not to adorn it with any flowers. So this one doesn't have any of the flowers. But the last video is teaching my rice paper flowers. And it's actually the first time that I'll be teaching those in any format, live workshop or not. And I feel it's very sentimental to me that it's a process about surrender for me. The rice paper flowers are about kind of like exploring and letting go. And as a friend of mine once said, getting out of the way. I show how I form these translucent and delicate flowers, and then how to treat them for different finishes. And I use these flowers to adorn 2 of the cakes from the course. This part of the course is broken into 9 step-by-step videos filmed from a variety of, might I say to the cameraman there that day, gorgeous camera angles. I talk a lot about cake composition in the course, a lot. I like for my technical process to be as natural as the textures that inspire them. Rock and stone is formed from layers of composites coming together and eroding over time. A cross-section of the side of a mountain tells a story, and for me, I think the cake making process tells a more interesting story than achieving a perfect result. Being that process is the story. So the pacing of the course, I'm very proud of. It feels like breathing, and I'm just really happy with what I made with If I Made. So like I'd said earlier, or mentioned it really briefly, the course is on sale now. And the reason that it's on sale, even though I don't usually discount my pricing with my cakes, is because this is about community and colleagues. This is about the whole industry for me. I feel like this is the only area of my business where I would offer any sort of discount, because it's more important to me that it be more accessible. I definitely believe that for what we put together, we do deserve to be paid for this information. It's amazing, and I'm very proud of it. And I want it to be as accessible as possible. This is a really, it's a valuable investment, I hope, in the industry at large, and helping everybody really value themselves more and changing our perspective. That we as cake makers can charge more, and to acknowledge you as the artist that you are. So it is on sale right now, between now and May 10th. And this is pretty much the most discounted price it will ever be. And that's mostly to support the launching of it. Even when If I Made does annual sales later, they'll never discount it this low again. So this is actually kind of the best price. And not only that, but there's an extra offering right now, because there's also, to support the launch, there's an extra video, which actually I haven't brought up yet. So I'll talk about that in a second. I'm totally jumping ahead. But in a nutshell, I just wanted to say, in a nutshell, the course content is 4 hours of business lessons, over 4 hours of texture techniques, 3 unique cake design tutorials, rice paper flour tutorials, proposal and tasting sheet templates, favorite supplies and resource guide, and pricing models. Those are really concrete things. I kind of think personally in a little bit of a cloud, but those concrete things I think might be easier to understand. And if you are ready to buy it, this is the best time. It really is the best time. Like I said, it will never be cheaper. So because we're trying to support the launching of the course, which is actually happening today, this is a very exciting thing, it is on sale, and there is an extra video that won't be offered again after today. It's the only time this video will be part of it. And this video is about color, matching color, and how to neutralize and naturalize color. I feel that the information in the course, not just the things I share that I've learned, but simply to watch another person's artistic process and the way that they think about their business so intimately, and for it to be filmed so beautifully, it's really valuable. It was very vulnerable for me, because the team around me, the director, the whole If I Made team, they really dug deep into my internal experience, and they asked me to put it all on loudspeaker for the benefit of sharing this. So even though we're giving away a lot, like this webinar, a lot of the information from it. And some of the promo videos, I have felt so deeply respected by If I Made during this whole process, from course design to filming, production, editing, and refining. It's been months up until now. Here we are now, marketing and launching. And the If I Made team has expertly walked me through an unfamiliar medium, filming, and even this webinar feels very unfamiliar, and I'm stumbling. But I really have felt my voice was honored the whole way. This has been a really enjoyable and easy process for me, even if at times also exhausting. But they really aim to make it easy for you too. And some of the ways around, if you want to buy the course, some of the specifics about this investment are that If I Made does offer payment plans starting at $80 a month, which is maybe much easier to allow in the business and your cash flow, especially because in the wedding season, cash flow is so weird. You will get lifetime access to the course, which will be accessible on any device, like a laptop, tablet, mobile, or whatever else they invent next. And lifetime access actually means getting to revisit the course content as many times as you want. It's not like you get a life to watch it once. You get to keep coming back to it anytime. And that's kind of one of the benefits that makes it different from an in-person workshop, which is a momentary experience. And then there's also a 15 money back guarantee. A 15-day money. I don't even know how to say that phrase. A 15-day money back guarantee. So you really only need to be mostly sure that you're interested in this. You can click the offer to the right to check out more details, see little taster videos, or to just purchase the course. You'll also be able to find it on ifimade.com. In my personal opinion, it's actually the money back guarantee and the lifetime access that are the best parts of the deal, because even though I shared a bunch of information from the course with you today, and hopefully you were able to get a lot out of the webinar, being able to go deeper and in the future revisit the material, that's what makes the online experience valuable in the way that an in-person workshop never can be. And then the money back guarantee just makes the investment feel safer, which is what I would want. And then this next slide is a little embarrassing, but basically it's because we just need to show you social proof that people do enjoy learning from me. My favorite feedback from all of my workshops is when someone tells me that their whole perspective about conventions in cake making have shifted. Maybe even kind of self-identity. It's even more rewarding to me when people report seeing themselves in a new way. And if you wanted to see a little bit more about what people have posted, you can search for the hashtag JRC workshops, although there's even a lot more than just that hashtag. I mean, I have been just so deeply rewarded with the sorts of incredible work my previous students have been putting out, and I get to see all of it because I'm referenced. So I wish you could see all of it too. It's just incredible and unique. But the JRC Workshops hashtag will definitely show a good portion of it. And then this extra video I was telling you about, if you buy the course within the next 30 minutes, you do get this extra video. So it actually makes these next 30 minutes, like, this is the best time of the deal. Like, that's the whole point of like the launch, is like, this is the best time that it is to buy the course. It'll be the best price and you get extra stuff. So that's just kind of crazy. Like, that's just like a truth about it. So this extra video is about color. It's about color, and it's what I believe are fundamentals on color theory for cakes. Specifically, it shows you two main things that I think are really, really key for making your cakes look very professional, and sophisticated. It's how to neutralize colors, because you don't necessarily get beautiful tones right out of the bottle, right out of the bucket, and how to make your colors look more natural. And then there's a demonstration on how to match colors, specifically for a very common palette in the wedding industry. So right now we'll play a video where I'll demonstrate one way that I paint a tarnished metal surface on a cake. And during the video, I'll be able to hop on the chat to answer hopefully as many questions as I can. I'll try and type as fast as possible.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey everyone, we're going to be moving over to the video of the demo of the tarnished metal.
I'm going to paint this cake, which is just some cake that I had lying around. It really doesn't matter too much what the base of it is, although preferably I prefer it to be darker. I'm going to paint this cake like tarnished silver. Tarnished silver has a lot of different expressions. There's actually quite a lot of warmth that comes out in it. Sometimes copper tones, blue tones, pink tones, yellow tones. So I'm going to pretty much let the whole color palette be available to me as I'm working with it and make my choices as I go. You could easily do this technique on top of a much darker surface and it'll just add a richness and a depth to it, which I really love. So because I don't have that option in this particular cake, I'm going to just add a little bit of darkness in certain areas. So I have here my tray of luster dusts. This is a tray of kind of like warmer and redder tones, and this is much cooler silvers and whites. And then I have got pure lemon extract as my medium to kind of make a paint out of my luster dusts. I'm going to paint into this general area just to show a little bit of the variation that occurs when you have some bas relief on it, and then when you also have the darker tones as depicted by this color. And at this point, I'm mostly interested in just getting a little bit of coverage, darkening up some of the areas, particularly in the shadows of the bas relief, and then maybe randomly throughout. I'm allowing there to be some variation. The colors that I layer on top will be largely more opaque, so it's not going to be too important about some of the harsher lines. The variation will come through because it's not completely opaque. So that's enough of a base just to give me something to start layering on top of. I'll get some really light areas where the areas are not covered by the mahogany color, and then I'll get a little bit more richness in some of these other areas. I might even add actually just a touch more. And when after I put the silvers on top, I can still go back in and layer more of the mahogany if I want it to have a little bit more expression. So now I'm going to grab a few areas with a little bit of color variation. I'm going to put in a little bit of a kind of blushy luster in order to get some pink tones to come out. And I can go back in and continue to refine that if I want more pink later. I started with a really warm base because tarnished silver actually warms up quite a bit from a polished silver. So now when I layer my next color on top, which is going to be kind of our basic silver coat, it'll have a lot of the warmth from this underpainting. I'm letting some areas be much more opaque with the silver layer, and then some areas be much thinner so that the underpainting can shine through. When I go over the bas-relief areas, I just kind of want to scrape over so that a lot of the underpainting of the mahogany and blush colors are still coming through in the most recessed parts of the bas-relief. So even though tarnished metal is typically very smooth, I actually like painting it on a very roughened surface. So this is my rough stone technique. At the base, underneath it, it has a lot of crackling. It has some kind of coarse texturing added in right here. I think it just makes it overall a little bit more interesting. In general, this will still read as tarnished silver, even though it doesn't have the smoothness that real silver might. So now that I have a basically silver looking layer, I can go back in and maybe add a little bit of gold here and there if I want to enhance it, or you could even tone in some blues or more pink or green. So it's kind of up to you how you want your tarnished silver to be expressed. You can even go in and darken it a little bit more. So I'll just show you a couple of quick options. I don't bother ever cleaning my brush as I'm moving between unless I'm trying to keep my sections pure, but in my mixing areas I like to keep my brush with a little bit of residue from the previous color that I used, and that'll help just continue the incorporations. So here's a little bit of gold on here, and there's an area here that's kind of already getting a little bit gilded. So I'm just going to see kind of how does that gold come in to express and add a little bit of interest. Maybe that's something that I want or is relevant to the design or the palette of the cake that I'm working on. And then if it just feels like the gold took over too much, you can always layer in a little bit more silver and let the gold be more of an underpainting that peeks through. Now I'm going to add a little bit more pink. This is kind of a blushier luster. And sometimes you can just let little areas like that exist, or if you want it to have a little more of a feature, you can brush it over the bas and give it a little bit of pink expression there. Sometimes you can simply use cornstarch if you'd like to preserve the color as it is, or you can use petal dust as an opportunity to bring in a little bit more color and variation if you like. So I just have on hand some ivory petal dust, plain cornstarch, and then a variety of petal dust colors. I brushed most of the luster off of this brush, but I'm going to keep this brush so that as I'm adding the cornstarch on, I might still be able to kind of help preserve the finish of the luster. Because tarnished silver isn't polished and bright, I'm using the cornstarch to help matte it out a little bit. If I want it to have an even stronger matte quality, I can use petal dust, which has a little bit of color to it. In this case, just simply the ivory, and that'll dull it out even more. And even when I dull it out, I want to leave some areas kind of peeking through. Maybe these are the little areas that were able to resist the effects of the tarnishing and maintain their glossy shine. if you're going to add color to the situation, just consider what sort of finish you're going for. You might still want to keep something generally in the lighter tones so as to preserve what you've already painted, but a little bit of pale blue or grayish blue can make a difference. And that's really getting in there. And if you keep forcing the brush over, you might even lift some of the paint from before. And now it's really starting to look tarnished right in there. And then I'm just going to show you by adding a touch of a darker red color. I'm going to dull it out a little bit with my ivory. So now I have kind of a neutrally mauve, and how that might tone down an area like this super bright silver. And then maybe even venturing a little bit more into the red. This silver was so cold and bright and sharp, and a deeper red. Pink it up a little bit, warm it up a little bit. So up here I have a little bit of the gold, and I'm going to bring in that camel color to just help accentuate it and draw it out a little bit more. And that's looking a little bit more like the part of tarnished silver that starts to discolor into those warmer bronzer tones. And I'll show you what it looks like on the flatter areas too. I'm pushing the brush quite hard. I'm simultaneously lifting the luster from underneath, and I'm adding the matte color from the petal dust. In conclusion, you can just keep playing with the surface until you're getting all the areas the way you like it. And if at any point it's starting to lose too much silver, just layer it back on.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us for that demo video. Now we're actually going to take some time and do some Q&A with Jasmine. She's going to come on the screen here in just a second. Our wonderful moderators behind the scenes have been keeping track of your questions. And so I'm going to pull up the doc now and get to your questions. Let's see. Ooh, there it is. Okay, great. Jasmine, there was a question about luster dust that I saw with the tarnish during the tarnished cake demo. What kind of brand do you use for your luster dust?
There are actually so many different brands of the same manufacturer. So I would say you can go on Amazon and there will be a whole bunch of ones that are just kind of generally good. Like I think Global Sugar Art puts out a good one. Oh Sweet something or other. I really don't pay too much attention to the brands. I'm just paying more attention to the quality of the actual dust when I'm looking at it online.
Cool. This is a question that we actually talked a lot about going into filming, about whether we should use demo or fake cakes or refrigerated cake, or real cakes versus styrofoam cakes. I know you have a lot of thoughts behind this, but Kim asked, do you use the same technique from the demo to the refrigerated cakes, and does it change and shift depending on like what medium or you're using?
Yes. Yes to two different parts of the question. So I do all the same techniques. However, the process of it, as far as like how I'm able to respond to the cake and the flow and timing of it, does change between when it's a styrofoam tier versus a real cake. You don't have to refrigerate it as much or at all, actually, when you're working with a styrofoam cake. And so when you're working with a real cake, you're always having to bring it in and out of the refrigerator as you're working, because you want it to be really hard in order to do these types of techniques. And then the other thing that might change is, because a lot of these are focused on a very dry environment, and most refrigerators do form a layer of condensation on the cake. If it's left in there too long, that might impact a little bit how you could finish the cake. But I have two types of refrigerators in my space. So one is a little bit better with condensation, and the other one is, wetter, moister.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about the course. I mean, you actually give us a little sneak peek into your industrial bakery, your kitchen as well, which I think was that was really cool for me to see you design the cakes, but then see where it actually happens in like day-to-day life, getting ready for weddings.
Yeah.
That's cool. Julie asks, how do you explain to the client you can design something better than they imagined? Because a lot of times clients are coming and they say, I want this exact cake. And you're like, no, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to recreate someone else's work. How do you manage that expectation with a client?
Sometimes in a client's process of planning their wedding, I might be the first person to actually ask them, how do you want your wedding to feel? Instead of putting too much attention on the photos that a client might bring to their tasting, I kind of back it up a little bit more, and I say, what's important to you about your wedding? How do you want the wedding to feel? What's informing the design choices that you're making? And then we basically bring it all the way back to that point and start designing from there, from that feeling, what they're trying to evoke. Because usually the cakes that they're bringing, or the inspirations that they're bringing, are for them a representation of that feeling. But if we can get back to the feeling and find where it resonates with my style and my work, that's the place to design from. And if ultimately they're not the right fit, they'll find somebody else who gets there, with what they're envisioning there. But it can actually be just a much deeper process, and yield something that they'll be even more happier with, which we know that they might be happier with it or not, but being the expert.
Cool. Tasha asks, I may be messing up that name, sorry about that, is how do you gain more clients or increase your orders when you're just starting out and trying to make a name for yourself?
I mentioned it briefly in the chat, but one of the things that I did at the beginning was, and I would propose this to maybe certain clients, that they could opt for more of a surprise at a discounted rate. Now I do the surprise and I don't discount it, but at the time when I was still learning and experimenting, I'd say, well, I understand that you want a really great wedding cake, and maybe you want something a little bit more adventurous or over the top. So you might be a really good client to offer this to, and then you can give them a lower price and basically buy yourself a lot more creative freedom, so that you're able to experiment and increase your portfolio, and still kind of actually be paid for it a little bit. And then that experimentation, hopefully it would go really well and be something that kind of furthers word of mouth as well.
Cool. We're getting a couple questions around payment plans, as well as how do you access buying the course?
I don't know.
Oh, just to give you guys a little bit more information, payment plans, we do have payment plans available starting at only $88. They're available for both US and international students. You can click the offer in the right-hand side and it'll take you to the launch page, and that's actually where we go into a lot more detail about the course. We also have actually some teaser videos as well, so you can actually see material from the actual course. And if you're interested in going into a deeper dive on what each video lesson covers, we actually have a What You'll Learn page that goes into a lot more detail. And then if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or email us at info@ifimade.com. So Jasmine, another question is around Jezebel, and this goes specifically into charging for cake tastings, and you go into a lot more detail about your pricing model in the course. But Jezebel asks, if you're charging for cake tasting, do you deduct that once they move forward with their order, or is it a separate fee?
I don't deduct it most of the time. When I have a relationship with a wedding planner or a venue who I know is bringing me a client who will 95% likely book, and that, just relationship is established enough that I know that they're not necessarily sending their client, around to a bunch of different people. I may make an arrangement with them that the tasting fee is waived. But otherwise, if it's somebody kind of coming to me for the first time, I charge it because I feel like that helps enforce that this is a really serious inquiry, and it's about valuing myself and what I'm offering. The tasting isn't just a chance to taste the cakes. It is an experience of it in and of itself. It's something that I wish I had actually been able to do when I got married. So I consider it valuable.
Here's some more technique, resource-based question. Adele asked, do you use ganache as a base for fondant or buttercream?
Yeah, I use both depending on what's flavor relevant for the inside of the cake.
That's cool. And I have to say, we got a chance to taste Jasmine's cakes when we were in her tasting studio. And she talks about this some in the course about, yes, she wants her cakes to look beautiful, but she also wants them to taste equally as delicious as they look. And I've had a lot of fondant cakes in my experience being in weddings for 10 years. And I have to say, Jasmine's cakes taste amazing. And I think that that's such a, I don't know, that was such an experience for me to see something so beautiful. But then also when I had the chance to taste it for the first time, I mean, there was no disappointment there. And I think that's another reason why she's so especially gifted at her artistry.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah. This is an interesting question. Do you charge less for people who know you are special, close friends, or those who really can't afford much? For me, I consider those more marketing cakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will often do that for, people who are close to me. I actually kind of go back to the model that I was saying for when you're starting out. You can use that as an opportunity to, just convey to your friend, look, this is going to be something that's maybe edgy territory for me and experimental because I'm ready to start playing with a new idea. And then you're lucky enough to get it at less than I would normally charge. So it's a great win-win opportunity for both of us.
Elizabeth asks about the type of brand of fondant you use to get the crack technique, but it's really more, okay, that's what I was wondering. Satin ice.
There are some fondants that I have heard won't crack, but I haven't experimented with all of them before. Satin ice yields really consistent results. I know exactly what's going to happen.
Cool. So kind of speaking to earlier about when you were talking about playtime and how important it is, someone had a question that when you're kind of playing around with different techniques, are you actually applying these to real cakes? Are you applying them to styrofoam cakes? Or is this just something more that you're just doing, on the kitchen counter in your kitchen?
Yes, all three.
Okay.
So sometimes I'm making just little panels if I want to kind of see something come to life, texturally, that doesn't need to be a whole composition. And then sometimes I am creating a whole composition because I have a complete cake in my mind that just needs to exist for me. So I will do those on styrofoam most of the time. And then when I'm I mentioned this briefly in the webinar too, but even when I'm working on commissioned cakes that have a clear design, I might be able to experiment a little bit with them. But it's really more of like the attitude, the approach of kind of like just this playfulness for when I'm working on the cake. And I kind of structure it in at the tasting with clients that they're, I want the freedom to be able to respond to what the cake is calling for. So, if the cake is kind of asking for something that wasn't, originally discussed as part of the composition, or, it's a detail that we never really spec'd out, I want to be able to respond and play and have the freedom to kind of experiment and put something else on the cake.
And just a quick reminder, guys, there's still time to purchase the course and get that free bonus video, the color theory video. And it's someone who didn't go to art school. I loved getting kind of a foundational understanding of color theory. And then Jasmine actually also applies it to cakes in a very, I feel like, niche and special way. Brides are constantly asking for those blush, cream color tones that can be very hard to get with dye right out of the box. And in this color theory video, Jasmine actually speaks specifically to that. And I'm not aware of any other resource online that speaks specifically to color in a way that is just, I feel like, something that as cake designers, you guys are encountering week to week, working on cakes specifically for brides who have a tendency to kind of want to live more in that cream, blush, kind of pink world when it comes to thinking about what they see their final wedding cake looking like. Just a couple more questions here, Jasmine. So one of the things that Tina had a great question about, when you're starting out, how can you build a portfolio without it costing too much?
One of the things is, as I was saying, is discounting your work at the beginning in exchange for the freedom, design freedom. So that's one way to do it. And as far as costing too much, it's such a relative thing. There's the cost of the fondant, and if you work with styrofoam, there's that, and then there's your time doing it as well. So if you can't kind of build it into getting at least partially paid for experimenting or playing, then sometimes, just doing little panels, as I'd said, to play with a different texture, and you can do that. You can just get a close screenshot of that and make that part of your portfolio. And it didn't have to be a huge investment of time. It didn't have to be a complete cake, but it's more important that your portfolio be really strong and powerful than prolific.
That's cool. Okay, we're going to wrap up with one last question from Jezebel. I would like to improve my sketches. I have ideas, but I struggle putting them into paper. Are there any suggestions for exercises that you know of that will help improve my skill of beginning for my sketches?
There are actually a lot of people who do workshops and tutorials about on sketching, which can be really valuable. I know one kind of locally called Very Merry Inspired, and a lot of people take that workshop. But I understand, sometimes you have something in your head and maybe the skill isn't quite there to bring it into the world. Practice.
Oh, it looks like we lost Jasmine. We're going to try to give her a couple seconds to get back on. But guys, thank you so much for sticking with us during this webinar. We know it went a little longer than usual, but hopefully you guys walked away with some really great tips and instructions for, how to take these principles that Jasmine has applied in her business and, implement them in your own business moving forward. If you have any questions, please feel free to email info@ifimade.com. We will be sending a replay link out later of the class in a high quality version of this class. So if you missed it or had to drop off for a meeting or you want to revisit and take some notes, the replay link will be available for 48 hours. And yeah, thank you guys so much again for joining us, and we will see you soon.